So I signed up to a boxing challenge. It was 12 weeks. It was the most intense physical, mental, emotional experience of my life. Absolute, just a game changer. I had told everybody and sold 20 tickets for a packet to come and watch me fight. A couple of weeks in, we're doing the training. And in that moment, I remember it so vividly. In that moment, like the knot in my throat and the tears that I was holding back, just being absolutely confronted by the fact that I couldn't keep my eyes open. I couldn't control my physiology. What? If I can't do this here, what am I going to do in front of all those people I've sold tickets to? Which I guess set the tone for that 12 weeks. It was the inner critic. It was showing up feeling like an absolute lunatic or loser. It was being uncoordinated.
Tiffany, how are you doing?
I am very good, Mark. How are you?
I am excited because you are podcaster, Roll with the Punches podcast. You are a boxing coach, you are a speaker, you're super into fitness, you're a boxer yourself. How did you end up here?
Good question. At the beginning, I was a sometimes quiet, young Tassie lass. I was born in Tassie, which is a small state off the bottom of Australia. And in my late teens, so I think I was maybe 19, I moved over to Melbourne, which is a far cry different to Tassie. We call it the Big Smoke. So I moved over to the Big Smoke and I was working for quite a few years in corporate kind of sales and the print industry. And one day I went to a seminar on resilience. And after the talk on resilience, we went down for a tour of the facility we were in. And the bottom level, there was a boxing gym called The Basement. And it had posters of a couple of blokes in suits with boxing gloves on. And it was Zero to Hero Executive Fight Club, 12-week boxing challenge. Any nuffy can do this. And I was like, can girls do this? Can girls be a part of this thing? So obviously, I just listened to an ex-Navy SEAL or aircrew officer doing a talk on interrogation training and the connection between the body and the mind and resilience. And that had me super amped. And I was like, yeah, let's do this. So I signed up to a boxing challenge. It was 12 weeks. It was the most intense physical, mental, emotional experience of my life. Absolute, just a game changer. And the thing is, I had such a big mouth. I had told everybody and sold 20 tickets for a packet to come and watch me fight. I was like, I'm going to fight in this challenge. You're going to come and watch me. I'm going to be a pro boxer. A couple of weeks in, we're doing the training. We start doing learning to catch punches, and which consists of standing in front of someone that you're friends with and lightly floating the gloves across to each other's face and learning how to roll with the punch and how to hold your guard up. And in that moment, I remember it so vividly. In that moment, like the knot in my throat and the tears that I was holding back, just being absolutely confronted by the fact that I couldn't keep my eyes open. I couldn't control my physiology. And I was so confronted by that. I remember just thinking, as soon as this class is over, I'm going to sit in my car and cry. Like I didn't cry in front of people back then. I was like, this is too much. What? If I can't do this here, what am I going to do in front of all those people I've sold tickets to? Which I guess set the tone for that 12 weeks. It was the inner critic. It was showing up feeling like an absolute lunatic or loser. It was being uncoordinated, my perception of the worst person in the gym, which I think was pretty accurate, and all of the things that come along with that, and choosing to step in and do it anyway. And here we
What
are.
was happening in your life that all of a sudden you decided, I want to go to a resilience workshop?
It was one of those things you end up in a place. This is one of my favorite things to do is end up in a place and then look back and go, oh, I got there because of that person. And then that thing led to that. And then that thing led to that. And so when someone, like in conversations like this, when someone goes, where did it all start? I start somewhere and then I go, oh, but then there's all these really distinct links. So I used to do a lot of business networking and still do. Always valued business networking. And somebody joined there's a international network called BNI, which some listeners may have heard of if they're into business networking. And I was back then a member of one of those groups, and somebody came from the USA and visited our local hub. And he caught up with me, and he happened to be staying at the venue where this resilience workshop is. And because he'd gotten to know me a bit, he said, "You should come to this talk. I think you'd really like it." So that's what got me into that talk. And back then, my personality was very much strong and independent and outspoken. And I want to do things that most people won't do. I want to do things that girls don't do. Like when I was 17, my uncle rocked up to my nan and pop's house one lunchtime with a motorbike and took me up the street and back. And I went home and said, "I'm going to so buying a motorbike." And when mum said, "No, you're not," I was like, "Oh, you just made my decision." And I bought a motorbike. It was like, I would do what people say I can't do. And I think that was a lot of ego and a lot of coping mechanisms. But at the time, I just thought that was me being strong and independent. That was me painting the picture of who I wanted to be. So a boxing challenge like this was right up my alley. But the process of it became something incredibly deep. For example, it was the first thing that I found myself in the middle of that I wasn't doing because I was naturally good at it. Prior to that, if someone said, "Hey, like you're a great runner, you should run," I'd run. If someone said it, if I was naturally good at something and got accolades for it, I would do it. If I wasn't, I wouldn't take part. And so to be doing this challenge and feeling every day like the worst at it and feeling like I'm actually not coordinated, I'm not built for this, this is not a natural talent for me. And the fact that I did the first fight, which was terrifying, and then I wanted to keep doing it, I started getting curious around that. I was like, what's everything else I do? And then I move on to the next shiny object. And this thing that's hard and confronting and doesn't feel like a natural talent, why do I want to keep coming back to this place? So it was real, I go, almost a spiritual playground of learning about the self that was me. Who am I? I learned about a version of myself beyond the story I had told myself and others, the one that I believed, which was in itself, which was both a fascinating process, but also confronting because once you start to ask big questions about yourself, you can't unask them. When enough people asked me, "Aren't you scared of getting punched in the face?" And at first, the novelty of that question was awesome. I was like, "No, because you get out. No, I'm not scared of punch in the face. Everyone else is. I'm cool." But after a while, I was like, "That's interesting. Why aren't you scared of standing in a boxing ring and getting punched in the face? That's not, in inverted commas, normal." So if you're not scared of that, Tiff, what are you scared of? And I remember a particular point in time starting to ponder that and realize that ideas around vulnerability and connection and relationship and being seen and visible and vulnerable, all like those were the things that started to bring up emotion in me. I was like, oh, stuff going on here. And it brought up for me, I remember it so I was 29 with the first event. And then it was within the next couple of years that I remember going for walks. So I live in a place called St Kilda at the time, and there's a big street called St Kilda Road. I used to go walking. And I can remember throwing the headphones in and going for walks and thinking about shadow boxing and all the things I learned. But then I also remember a time where all of a sudden I was pondering this childhood memory of being abused, of being sexually abused as a kid, and that randomly just starting to come up. Now, I'd never spoken of that. I'd never told anyone about that. And all of a sudden, all these years later, I'm having these thoughts. And I'm like, that's interesting. Why, after all this time, we packed that up into a box. We tucked that away so we didn't have to think about that or admit that it ever happened. And then it's in my awareness. And I think the relationship of the physicality of the boxing ring and the levels of awareness of who I am in the world and what matters and what scares me, all of those, starting to shine a light on all of those things, started to make connections with maybe the why behind it, the why behind the answers. So
when you talk about being 17-year-old, being the type of person whose mom said, "I can't get a dirt bike, motorbike, I'm getting one," right?
yeah.
You pick the picture that paints in my head, and probably is a trailblazing girl, just wants to break the boundaries, a badass, like just wants to do stuff, right? But when you were telling that story, you also mentioned the words ego, right? And a coping mechanism. Now, this is before you had come to the realization that you had come to at 29. So at that point at 17, where was the ego coming from and what were you coping with?
I think that if I look at it now, I think that because of what had happened back then and how that plays out in affecting how you deal with both emotional and physical intimacy and trust and connection and people, I think that it became a new way to feel connected and feel validated at a distance. the idea to create this persona that is validated, that people can outwardly love and give me recognition for in a more seen public but at a safe distance, if that makes sense. Like, one of the things I eventually realized when I analyzed what is it about the boxing ring, what is it about this space that drew me in and made me feel empowered, was the idea around things like boundaries. And so it was one of the first things was the idea of standing in front of an opponent and the honesty of the fact that they're not telling lies to you or anyone else. Like, they're standing in front of you and they're saying, I'm going to punch you in the face with the intent to harm. And I'm going to do it in front of all these people that can see, and we're not going to tell any other story about that. And then the ability for me to be in the middle of that in front of everyone and say, hey, look, I can look after myself. But also the idea of boundaries. Inside the boxing ring, there's rules and boundaries, and I know and understand them. And because I know and understand them, I can enforce them. And I look at boundaries as an adult and understanding them as I reflect over my life, and how that was so different to the way I functioned without rules, without understanding. If I don't know, if I'm the one to set the boundary, it becomes a whole different thing. So the idea of going, someone could be close, there's such a huge level of intimacy in boxing, both from your team, your teammates, and even your opponent. There's physical, but also psychological intimacy. You're letting someone know that. I would say my coach, even before I was diving this deep into the psychology and the emotions and I guess the metaphor for it for me, my coach saw deeper into me than anyone probably has, and deeper than I could realize at the time. Because you're in a really vulnerable and trusting environment, and it's just under the facade of punching people in the face. So it becomes really interesting. And this is why I'm so passionate about especially women, teaching women to box, and not for fighting, but just for learning the art. Because when do we stand up and, for a start, even just quite simply get inside our body? Like, when you actually learn the art of boxing, even just standing alone to learn the form, you have to step deep inside your body with full body awareness and put that awareness onto parts of your body to understand how to execute movement, to understand how to execute and enforce power, to hold your space. All as I say it, because I've never really said it like that before, but I've been teaching a boxing workshop, and so it's fresh in my mind. It's I think the subconscious messaging to ourselves and our body in that process is powerful, because the way I see people transform, and they don't even have to throw a punch at anyone. They don't even have to spar, let alone fight, to experience the power of stepping into that physical space.
The way you described stepping into the box and then the experiences associated with it, I was just visualizing it with you. And you were talking about boundaries and truthfulness and honesty in the action of boxing. That an opponent is right in front of you. You are very clear about what her intentions are. She's also very clear about what her intentions are. And there's common ground. And now you can interact in a certain way. And you talked about not being surprised, understanding the rules, being able to make sense of what was happening. And a lot of people, when they've gone through some type of a trauma, it's like the rules of the world weren't explained to them. They were in a moment where something really ridiculous happened. And now when they ponder about it, they're trying to make the sense of the world from that perspective. As tragic as this moment was, you conquered it with your very first step in the boxing ring, and I've been continuing to conquer it ever since. You had a deep realization when you were 29, and you've grown as a person incredibly ever since then, now becoming a torch to other women, leader. But that part of you still lives within you. How has that affected your personal relationships?
Massively. And I think, so if I go back 4 years to when I started Roll with the Punches podcast, we went into the pandemic. And so I was in the fitness industry, still am, and had the couple of years prior had launched 2 boutique gyms in a partnership with 3 other people. And one of those gyms was about to stop losing money and start getting into the green finally, and the other one wasn't. And then the whole industry and Melbourne went into the longest lockdowns in the world. And it forced me to think about how I was going to approach that. I was like, this for me, this could be bankruptcy, this could be it. And I don't want to spend my time trying to make money. So I'm going to do something really that can't be taken away. And a series of different little events led towards, obviously, I started the podcast. And what I realized in the podcasting was that it was my new emotional boxing ring. I was having these epiphanies really quickly that, for example, I just remember having conversations like you and I are now and thinking, I have never asked somebody directly to share such deep and vulnerable. Like, I was asking people questions about themselves to share in a public arena and creating this space of trust, intimacy, and connection. And I was sharing parts of myself too and I just thought it made me think if I remember years before, one of my best mates, she was my housemate and my sparring partner. And I'd been on a date once and I got home from the date and she goes, "How was your date?" I can't even remember who it was with or any of the details, but she goes, "How was your date?" And I go, "Yeah, it was good." And she goes, "What is it?" I can't remember the questions, but I'll make them up. "What does he do for work?" I'm like, "Oh, no." "What's his last name?" "I don't know." She asked me about 5 or 6 questions. "Do you talk?" Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear. And
Yeah, yeah,
she
yeah.
goes, "What?" But if I reflect now, I would never ask people I would never want to be invasive or ask them to open up. And I feel like that was a protective mechanism for me because I didn't want to be seen because I knew that secret. My subconscious knew what I was hiding and there was shame associated and there was secrecy. And it was like, I wouldn't ask people to share themselves because I didn't want to be seen, comes back to that being seen in the boxing ring was really powerful. And that really only hopped into my awareness, like I said, when I started podcasting and I started realizing it was changing. And I don't think we think how we live and what we do and what we experience is everyone's experience. And then all of a sudden, when you start getting some awareness about yourself and why you might respond or be the way you are in certain situations, you realize that's not everybody. That's not how people, and yeah, questioning that it was interesting. So I noticed that. And then when I started boxing, the work I did in the boxing ring transformed me outside of the boxing ring in ways I didn't realize it was going to. So if I keep doing this here, this is going to transform who I am outside of here. So it's not because I'm very sensitive to the idea of wearing masks now. Like, I saw that I wore a mask for 3 decades through this persona, which essentially meant that I lacked real connection and real knowing of people. So then if I came to times when times were tough and I needed someone and I wasn't coping, I didn't know who to show that to because I'd never showed that that person lived within me. And it was like, that was a very isolating experience to be like, I need someone right now, but I haven't made any emotional deposits in any of my friendships. Like, the people closest to me actually, I don't think they realize how close they are to me because I have those walls up and I've put on this persona of just the chick that's okay all the time. Yeah.
The moment you came to that realization, and I know it's not one of those like aha moment, is like you just woke up and you came to the realization, right? It's a slow, gradual process. But at some point, it became strong enough that you can't ignore it anymore. And you realize that you've been wearing a mask and that has isolated yourself from others and perhaps in some ways from yourself. It takes courage to then take the next step. But your life and story is all about courage.
Yeah.
You went in the boxing ring when you knew nothing about it, ready to get your teeth knocked out. So it took courage in that moment to say, I want to start becoming a different version of it. And there are a lot of people who are listening to this, perhaps, who've experienced similar things or likewise things and are not happy with the relationship they have built. Maybe they feel like they have built walls around them, putting masks on. Tell us the process of that gradual shift into being open, honest, and vulnerable and letting people in so they could connect with you.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I think if there's two of the major lessons that I like to share about, it's the idea of redefining courage and redefining resilience. They're probably the main two for me. So the idea that if I look back, my idea of courage previously was doing things that other people were scared of. So getting punched, I wasn't scared of it, but other people were. So I was like, oh, well, I'm courageous. And that's not the truth. That's me doing something that looks like courage that isn't courage to me because on the same token, I was running away from all the things that really mattered, that really scared me. And the same goes for resilience. When you do hard things, like we talk about resilience like it is this one-time thing, like you're either a resilient person or you're not. And if you do a bunch of practices, you become a resilient person. And if you want to follow the David Goggins style of people, it's like just doing hard things. And I'm all for obviously doing hard things, but it's this pliable, ebbing and flowing thing, resilience. And it ebbs and flows on the macro of what's going on in your world and how you relate to what's going on in your world. And it ebbs and flows on the micro day to day. Like if I have a bad night's sleep or if I have something like that's emotionally hitting me on a certain day, then I'm less resilient on that. That doesn't mean I'm not a resilient person. And I think we have to be careful about our relationship, our personal relationships with these words, because we end up living to the ideals of or expectations of others or ourselves, which is no longer courageous. Like resilience means doing hard stuff so that you can bounce back from doing hard stuff. But when I explained it recently, I was talking about training fighters. When you're training fighters for their first fight, especially in those challenge environments, so everyone comes in on the same level, how do we get resilient to getting hit? We get hit. Like the first thing you have to do is walk into the fire, is get hit and get familiar with getting hit and just be able to weather the storm. Because if you can't do that, you can't get resilient. If you can't take a hit, you can't get strong for hits. But once you've learned to do that and you've got a level of familiarity and competence in that, then walking in and getting hit, there's an expiry date on that. You're just going to have, like I have had plenty of black eyes, like just walking in and getting more black eyes that's not resilience anymore. So then the hard thing becomes maybe how to rest, maybe how to change tact, maybe how to start wanting to avoid getting hit, right? Which is a hard thing to wrap your head around because, I was told resilience was getting hit and I've gotten accolades for that. And if you get hit a lot, people are like, how tough is she? How tough is she? She gets hit, doesn't bother her. And then you just want to be the girl that gets hit and it doesn't bother her. It's really hard to get sucked into that. So you can fall into another version of here's the persona I'm playing into. We tell ourselves stories. And yet on the inside, what do those hits mean to me? It's, I'm taking hits. I'm not getting better. I'm this. I'm like, we're telling stories internally. And so I feel like I've gone on a tangent and can't remember exactly the question you asked me, which I do.
You're on the right track. This is good, right? Because now it has making me ask a lot other questions. But originally what I asked was when you decided to open up, finally let people in. What was that
Yes.
experience like? Because a lot of people, there's a big difference between intellectually understanding something and then emotionally accepting it and be able to carry it out. You and I both
Yeah.
know that intellectually, a lot of things are easy. Like I need to lose weight. I know what to do. Eat less
Yeah.
and exercise. I'm in a bad relationship. I know what to do. Get out of it. I hate
Yeah.
my job. I know what to do. Look for a new job. People are stuck in bad relationship for decades and jobs for decades and obese bodies for decades because intellectually understanding something doesn't mean we're emotionally able to carry it out. So
Yeah.
at this point in your life, what I was referring to was like you're intellectually understanding that I'm wearing masks and intellectually understanding I need to let people in because I truly don't have anybody who knows me, a version of Tiffany, a version I
Yeah.
choose to show them. So now, what is this process like to be able to open up and letting people in?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the very beginning where I went, all right, this thing happened. This thing happened. It started to pop into my mind. What's the deal? Dr. Google. I start looking it up. I've got a very good friend that I used to catch up with at that time and she was a clinical psychologist and I said to her, hey, if someone went through this as a kid and never really spoke about it and then they were an adult, would they be okay? And her answer was, F no. They wouldn't have dealt with anything. And it was really, and then a couple of weeks later, she goes, were you talking about XYZ person, one of our mutual friends? And I said, actually, no, I was talking about myself. And she was mortified. She goes, oh, I would have answered very differently if I thought you were referring to yourself. Anyway, from there, she referred me to psychologist. And over the bit of time, I saw a variety of different psychologists. And I remember one in particular, I saw him, he was another friend had recommended him. And at our 4th or 5th session, he goes, Tiffany, normally by 3 to 4 sessions, I have a real sense of who someone is and what they need. And I just don't get that with you. And I look back at that now, and because I'd gone, I remember, I was like, hi, Michael, I'm Tiff. This happened to me. And so can you do what you do to fix it? Like, I thought therapy was this guy's got the answer and he'll fix whatever's wrong with me. And I didn't know what that was. And he, obviously, because I'm going in like that, like he's going to give me some magic pill. And he's like, because I still didn't have the ability to open up and express and connect. And that was years ago. And then I had other psychologists after that. And I remember the first time I told my dad, so I sent him a text message, very close with my dad. He's an amazing human. He was living over here in Melbourne with me at the time. And I remember sending him an essay saying, so I want to tell you why I've been seeing a psychologist, but I'm not ready to have a conversation with you. Do you mind if I send you an email? And he said yes, and I sent him an email. And I remember the email he responded back with, and I just remember thinking, what an amazing dad. Like, how does he know what to say? How lucky am I? And I can't remember what year that was. And so after I told him and maybe a couple of other family members, I felt like I'd opened up and I'd acknowledged. But I remember I think it was like episode 68 of my show. So in 2020, I was having a conversation with one of my regular guests and podcasting friends. And in the middle of the conversation, I made a reference to saying, oh, when we're something about being terrified of stuff in childhood or whatever, some sort of kind of blasé reference. And then after a couple of minutes, he goes, hang on, what were you referring to when you made, and it felt an hour of him asking that question. Like I remember time just stopped and my heart rate rose because I knew what he was asking me, and I knew that I was about to publicly sat for the first. And I said years of childhood sexual abuse, and he goes, "Wow, have you ever said that publicly before?" And I said, "No. We love you," and blah blah blah, and we talked for a couple of minutes and then we got on with the conversation. And what was interesting is I remember the next day waking up and going, oh, I didn't realize how heavy that was. I didn't realize the burden I was carrying having never said that. And this is at a time when in my mind the story I told myself is people know it's not a secret anymore. And since then my ability to talk about that, it's not only easy, I love to talk about it. Because I find that the permission it gives other people to own what's happened or know that they're not alone. Like they're not alone. Like in Australia, it's 1 in 3 women, it's 1 in 5 men. It's a lot. It's happening to a lot of us. So I think, yeah, I'm really passionate about the ability to do that. And yeah, if I look at how I've connected with people and how I do now compared to how I did 4 or 5 years ago, it just changes and evolves. And I think one of the best things about therapists is my therapist is now someone that came on the show as an author. And our conversation turned into probably the most confronting and brutal therapy session, which took me a month to put live on my show because it felt that big. I was like, am I going to put this out? This guy's like the velvet sledgehammer. He did not hold back. And I still work with him today. That was in 2020. He's still my therapist today. He's brilliant. But working with someone like that gives you the ability we don't see the change we make. I know there's been times when I've gone, I don't know why I still do. I don't have nothing to talk about today. Like, why am I still in this? Or you feel like you haven't changed. And then the therapist, you talk about a circumstance and they'll go, wow, like that's very different to how you would have once. And then you go, oh yeah, wow, I am a different person now, which is incredible.
The reason I ask this question is because I personally know people and I'm aware of people who sometimes have gone through some unfortunate things like this. And exactly like you defined and how you explained yourself, all those things about wanting to hide and all of those things are there. But also what happens is a difficulty to express themselves, difficulty expressing their emotions. They love somebody, but they can't tell them that I love you. Or they connect with some people at somebody and they just can't dig deep and ask about what was your day like? It was okay. They don't know when to stop asking more about your day. Am I now really crossing the boundary? Should I be, it's 2 times enough? Where I am like, how's it day? Good. Good what? What happened? I don't know. Like, this is whatever. Yeah, but you don't want to share it with me? Like, what's wrong? It's for me, that's normal. Tell me what was it? But perhaps the third question is very discomforting for the other person. Should I be really asking that? So what ends up happening is a lot of times you go through life feeling misunderstood, that it's not that they're not genuinely interested in wanting to know more about you, which some people only open up about when they're pressed a little bit or when they show that level of care, like he really wants to know about my day. Well, let me open up. It go misunderstood. But the fact that they can't continue to say all the time, I love you, doesn't mean that they don't love the person. The reason I'm asking this question is these are the little moments in life that are practical, that if you had personal experiences, like how you maneuvered around them, if you experience these at all, that would be helpful for the person who's hearing it and saying, you know what? I feel exactly the same way. And I love how Tiffany handled it. And perhaps I'll try. That's what I really meant.
Yeah. And I absolutely resonate with that idea of finding it difficult to say I love you. It is. Don't even know if I could explain how or why it feels that way, but I talked about it recently. The person who I referenced, which is Craig, who asked the question on the podcast, and he's been incredibly pivotal in this period of my life So he's obviously a male. I've had a lot of males that have brought dysfunctional relationships and not healthy kind of situations into my life. And so to work closely with someone like him and be safe and feel safe and be able to have safe conversations, like he's the person who allowed me to learn to have difficult conversations and say and be how I feel and be okay with it and allow someone in. And I think it's because he's can be a little bit similar, like a little bit guarded but very open as well. Like he understands, and because when somebody understands, like I remember I work with him now. I work with him producing his podcast as well as my own. And I remember in the early days when we went from, because I used to volunteer for him, and he was a mentor for me, and I'd volunteer, and then once I started my own podcast, and he rang me one day and he said, "You're doing really well. I'd love you to do some of my show." And so I started volunteer, like helping. I said, "Oh, I'll do that. And you can give me some more mentoring and I'll do that." And then eventually, about 6 months later, he said, "Okay, we'd like you to be a part of the team. We're going to pay you now and you're going to do a bit more." And with that shift in the dynamic of the relationship, I found it quite difficult. I found myself relating differently. There was this layering of fear of an expectation. It was like, oh, hang on, he's buying me now. What are his expectations of me? What is he going to take from me? What does he want from me? And at times I could feel emotional conflict and he could pick up on that. And I remember once we had a meeting, we had to go and I had a meeting with him and he said, "Look, I feel like what's really important to me is that you love our company and that you love me." And he used that word, that you love me. That matters most. I don't just want someone that can do the job. This is a value of mine. And I remember sitting in the chair and it was such a confronting conversation. He goes, "And sometimes I feel like you really want to be part of something, but you're holding back and so he could see it a mile away." And I said to him that I was like, "Do you trust me?" And he was like, "Yes." And then I remember thinking, why does he trust me? So he was talking and I was crying. I'm sure he was crying. It was a very emotional conversation. But when I left it, I was just like, why is he? Because if I was him, or I feel like if anyone else was in his shoes and they got this girl here that he feels isn't all in and isn't opening up, like I'd be kicking him out of the business. Why is he trusting me and keeping me in? But I felt so fortunate because I hadn't what I wanted to say and what I felt, like there was the wall, like the blank face. And I was thinking it, but people don't know what you think. And that's how I operated. Like I operated in a world prior to that where I loved people and they meant the world to me. But I never realized that they could never possibly know that because poker face. I had a poker face and would be terrifying to allow someone to know that they mean the world to me. But that just felt normal to me. That was just protective. And I just assumed people know because I know, which sounds ridiculous now. So that was massive. And to have someone, like I said, like him, to have those conversations, and we've had some incredible conversations and even on-air conversations now, where even at times when him to say, I remember once when he said, "I feel like sometimes it feels like you resent me." And this was the first time I had to have a confronting conversation. Like I'm not good with conflict or confrontation. And I remember saying to him in that conversation, sometimes I do feel that way. I have that feeling, but the reason I haven't confronted it is because it's not reality. It doesn't fit with how I actually feel about you. I'm just having a triggered emotion. So what would happen is things like if he would turn up to right on time to an episode with a guest and not be there 5 minutes before to have a bit of a mingle with me, things like that could make me feel, oh, I don't matter. You don't care. You don't even want to say hi to me before the guest comes on. Like I'm just a commodity. I have this real sensitivity about being just this cog in your machine. I'm just this thing you use for a purpose and then you discard. And so if small little interactions like that, lateness can be a real trigger for me. So if he would turn up right on time, I would go from sitting there 5 or 10 minutes before excited to I'd look at the time and then the emotions would just switch. And I was like, now I find it really hard to interact with you because you've flipped that emotional switch. And it's not a choice. Like that's the emotional thing that is triggered by an old memory, like I said, in the subconscious. So yeah, the ability to say to him, so I do feel that way, but it's not a choice. And in my mind, I know it doesn't fit, I'm still just trying to figure out how I manage me in this. But I know that's not you, and I love you still. So those sort of conversations, they're so hard, but they're so healing. And I think it takes the ability to have really special people around you to allow for that, which again, for people listening that have past history like myself, we struggle more than others in recognizing good people and not good people all the time, and understanding how to, because we aren't that great with boundaries, we're not setting boundaries in, or we're not feeling strong enough to enforce or rectify behavior that's not great, or maybe even recognize it. So it just becomes really difficult because we get bitten a lot of times before we start to develop the right skills to prevent getting bitten.
What role does anxiety play at all in your life?
I don't think it took a lot of, I'd say, therapy and awareness and work to even unlock feeling. So I was never an anxious person. I was and am still busy. Like I stay occupied and busy and doing and thrive in chaos, which is why when COVID hit and I had this business success, I was like, is this just here while there's chaos and then it will fall away because I cope well in chaos? But one of the questions I asked, so in 2019, I returned to competition fighting after 3 or 4 years off. And in those 3 or 4 years off, I had chosen to go in and do therapy again on emotions, right? I'd realized that I wasn't feeling emotions, but also I'd recognized that in the boxing ring, dissociation, that was my superpower. Like that poker face I referenced before, that happened in the boxing ring. So you couldn't see if I was tired, you couldn't see if I was hurt, you couldn't see anything. And I never emotionally reacted. I never got angry. I never got scared. Oh, we were always scared. Like there's always adrenaline and therefore nerves and anxiety in that sense. Things never happened in the moment. And that was, again, a coping mechanism that had carried through from childhood. Danger, we go into dissociation, we process the emotions later when we're out of that situation, out of that environment. And that was happening then. And so when I went in to do this therapy, I was like, all right, do you want to be a world champion boxer or do you want to be a healthy human? Because you can't pull the lever on emotions outside of the boxing ring and not pull them inside the boxing ring. And then when I went back into competition in 2019, I remember going down to the gym, hadn't been sparring or fighting for years, obviously. I'd been training and keeping fit, got put into a round robin sparring with one of the blokes. So he was getting ready for a fight and everyone was jumping in fresh to do a round with him. And I got in and he hits me with this uppercut to the nose that was like, that has got to have broken my nose. I got hit with 2 more of those. But the overwhelming sense of feeling anxiety, feeling like visible, and feeling that, like I remember saying to people, I felt naked in front of everyone in that ring because I felt emotions and I recognized I was feeling emotions and I felt that everyone could see my emotions, and that was more terrifying to me than anything, which was interesting because it brought a whole new range of challenges to the art of fighting. But because of my relationship with boxing being one of self-development and self-awareness, it was like this catch-22. It was this positive. It was a real challenge in boxing and fighting. But that translates to self-care and self-love because all of a sudden I didn't want to get hit. So I was pulling back. I was finding it more difficult to get into the fight and stay there to throw the punches because there was this secondary layer of, but I don't just want to get hit in order to be, like I was talking about that resilience earlier. I didn't want to just get hit anymore. It's like there's self-care. I want to hit. I want to come out on top, but not at the cost of my own self. So I think to have a sport, I think the ability to have something that evokes anxiety and nerves and adrenaline in something that you love so that you can develop a relationship with the sensation in your body so that you can deal with it when it pops up in life. That's one of the big things I love about boxing is how do you handle yourself when your body's filled with adrenaline and anxiety? How do you handle yourself? And if you can handle yourself in the boxing ring when all of that happens, then when it happens outside of that, you have a reference point. You go, this is uncomfortable, but you know what because what I know now is when I feel anxious, which before doing public speaking, I still get like that. But I go, you know what it means for the boxing ring? I don't want to get in the boxing ring and not have adrenaline pumping through my veins. It makes me feel painless. It makes my cognition sharper. It makes me ready. It makes me think more deeply. It makes me react faster. All of these things. I don't want to go into competition like that. So when I feel that way, I go, okay, my body's priming itself for performance. This is a great thing. So it's our relationship with the sensation or the emotion or the story is far more powerful. And I think that, yeah, like I said, having your version of a boxing ring, whatever that might be, it could be dancing, it could be sport, it could be anything that brings you face to face with your own self-doubt and ability to or develop a skill in something or overcome challenge and discomfort.
This idea of being in the ring and then treating yourself as a punching bag and taking pride in the fact that I'm the girl that can just take the pain. You talked about almost becoming an identity of yours. I think there is some aspect of self-hurt associated with that. And I'm wondering if this is anyhow related or it's just an isolated incident of its own.
What I do know through others who I've boxed with and spoken with, some of them on my show and some of them just in private conversations, some of everyone's circumstance and relationship with it is very different. So I had a girl on my show and I've just recorded a game with her 4 years later. But I remember when I first connected with her, she was around my age-ish, probably a little bit couple of years older. We both had this background of sexual abuse as children. Hers was far more violent and big, and she had completely forgotten hers for years until it came up in adulthood. But we both found boxing as adults, and it was incredibly cathartic and powerful. However, we sat with our first coffee together before we podcasted and we were talking about it, and I was like, it's amazing because we've had the same experience. We found the same method of healing. However, when she fought, she went into this completely disempowered state of just freeze of getting hit, and then the narrative of getting hit was you deserve it, you deserve like all of this stuff. Whereas I had connected with this completely different part of it. And I know of people who enjoy getting hit, and not in a bad way, but just they're like, it's enjoyable for me. Like they fight back, but they don't mind getting hit. They have no care to not get hit. I think mine was literally just there was a dissociation of feeling from it. So it wasn't that I enjoyed getting hit. It was just that it didn't bother me because I almost wasn't there for it. I was too busy doing what I was doing. I had this superpower, and now I have that less. So now when I get hit, I'm like, nah, I don't stand for this. Like I've changed a lot, and I think it's because my relationship and understanding, and over time I've brought that somatic experience closer to reality, to the now. That you don't get to hurt me. I don't stand for this. I'm not. I'm tough, but only when I need to be and not in a senseless way. But yeah, like I said, everyone's experience is very different. So I would hate to think that someone would listen to this and go, you know what? I've got the same background. I'm going to try boxing. And that they try boxing and then they get in the ring with someone and they capitulate and then they tell themselves, they develop a story around they're not enough or they're broken or there's something. Like our stories are all so different and our relationship with our story, but we get clues. Like I learn clues about who I am and where I could get value from what sort of work, pending who I am in the ring. The powerful thing about the boxing ring is it is pure instinct. There's no time for storytelling or reasoning. When a punch is flying at your face, you react and you can't tell a story about that because in life, we make choices and then we justify them. Like I think we're little justification factories. And in the boxing ring, you're left with, no, you did that before thought and storytelling could come in. You can't hide it and put on a facade. It's like, nah, you flinched and you flinch every time. And if you don't want to flinch, you've got to retrain yourself how to not flinch. You've got to figure it out. You've got to problem solve it. And part of that will be physical and part of it will be mental and psychological. And then you get to overcome it. But it makes you look at it. It makes you own it and go, nah, this is me. This is what I do. We can all see it plain as day. And I don't know, I just think that's really powerful. And I wonder, I think anything that puts you in the performance state, that puts adrenaline into your body and makes you in the moment, anything will do that. But boxing's a really powerful one.
Everybody has a story and everybody has a relationship with their story. Tiffany, if somewhere were to just meet you out of nowhere, right? You're strong and confident, and you're a teacher, and you're a speaker, and you're a boxer. And if that person had some type of a deep, dark story, they might look at you as a god, right? And the internet has given the voice to everybody, but not everybody chooses to show this level of vulnerability, chooses to share truth and honesty at this level. Most people choose to appear as a god. Something happened, I went through this miraculous thing, and look at me now. And now others are envious of that. But the fact that you are so high up, you have accomplished so many things, and still you are able to get down and dirty, get your hands dirty, get your feet dirty, go back into the depth of those emotions, and in a way, share that experience so others can go on a journey with you. This has been the best conversation I've had perhaps all year. I talked to a lot of people. Thank you for allowing me to have a glimpse into Tiffany the person behind Tiffany the boxer and the famous podcaster and the traveler and this amazing human being that you are. It's truly an honor and a privilege to talk to you like this.
Thank you so much. That really means the world. That really means the world. I think we all put people on pedestals and look at their highlight reels, and I urge people to think if you see a level 10 highlight reel, you could safely make the assumption that there is a level 10 deficit. There is a level 10 challenge that lives beneath that you're just not seeing. And I think that's a pretty safe assumption.
Thank you for so much for being on the show. I hope we can talk again.
Thank you.
Thank you.